Another bromance is coming to an end. This time it's Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. We have already talked to you about the change in the attitude of the American president to his Russian colleague. The word colleague here is actually quite appropriate, because Trump always liked Putin. A strong-willed authoritarian dictator is the limit of Donald Trump's dreams, because Trump wants everything the same. He wants military parades, he wants unlimited power, he wants to prison those who don't like, and so on. But here is the problem: Vladimir Putin in his dictatorship, according to Donald Trump, has lost his mind. As it is now represented by the American high circles, Vladimir Putin just lost contact with reality. And Trump has been doing everything he can to save Vladimir Putin, trying to save Russia from smashing itself to death against Ukraine. Because the situation in Russia is getting worse and worse, and with the economy, and with the army, and with the equipment, and in fact, with the people who die in the large numbers. And Trump speaks openly about it and says, Vladimir, he says, hello, I'm trying to help you, I'm trying to pull you out, you're in this shit, you have no perspective, you're in the wrong, come on, hold on to my hand and let's go together to rule the world. But no, Putin spits into this hand, and accordingly, once by once, and Trump is tired of it. Now Trump is speaking quite harshly, issuing ultimatums to Putin and sending 2 nuclear submarines toward the coast of Russia, or at least closer to Russia. And today we will just talk about the answer of Vladimir Putin. After a brief pause, Vladimir Putin eventually responded to Donald Trump's ultimatum, but did so in a peculiar way and ended up significantly worsening his own position. You see, the challenge Putin faced in dealing with Trump was both simple and complex at the same time. His task was to keep up the appearance for as long as possible and without yielding any real results that he, Vladimir Putin, still wanted to do business with Trump and wasn't the one standing in the way of peace in Ukraine. His goal was to keep swinging on that political seesaw, on one hand flattering Trump while on the other making no real concessions. In other words, staying in that limbo where Donald Trump ultimately doesn't help Ukraine. In fact, he was even somewhat content with Trump occasionally helping Russia, like easing certain sanctions. That situation suited Putin perfectly. He wanted it to continue just like that. His aim was for Trump's behavior to become destructive for Ukraine. He wanted Trump's behavior to become destructive for the West and for Western unity. And maybe at the higher point of his desire, Vladimir Putin dreamed that he would eventually attack some of the Baltic countries, for example, and Trump would not interfere, and America would not fulfill its conditions within NATO. In fact, this was Vladimir Putin's goal, that is, not to have too much contact, but at the same time preserve the loyalty of Donald Trump. And this obviously did not work out for Vladimir Putin. We can record it on August 2025. And the strategy worked until a certain moment when Vladimir Putin played Trump in the right way. When he made his address not in the middle of the day but in the middle of the night so that Trump would see them. When Vladimir Putin was all so kind, sent Trump pictures through Witkoff and said in every way how cool he was. But the main mistake that destroyed this whole construction is the negotiations in Istanbul, or rather, the one who Vladimir Putin sent over there. This is Vladimir Medinsky. I said back then that this was Putin's biggest mistake on this track with Trump, because rank is very important for the Americans. They have such a quite status society at all these suits, well, you remember how Trump burned out, well, not only Trump but mostly there were J.D. Vance, journalists, and the American press, how they burned out Volodymyr Zelensky for the lack of a suit. Because America is about status, America is about rank, America is about respect for their representations. Therefore, when you send to negotiations, you can say that this is a great man, that this is the most cool. But if you send Vladimir Medinsky, who does not have any normal formal or informal position, it will give negative results, especially when the United States. Remember the first round of talks, they sent not just anyone but Marco Rubio, the second most powerful person in the country, maybe even more than that, holding 4 positions at once. Well, because of Trump's own quirks and decisions about his administration, America sent a big shot there while Russia sent a nobody. And in my view, that was a turning point. After that, Trump started to have some doubts. And into those doubts started to mix the positions of Kellogg, Marco Rubio, his wife Melania, and European partners, specifically Stubb, Starmer, and Macron. Well, in short and in the end, Trump really opened his eyes. He saw that no matter how much he said to Vladimir Putin, no matter how much compliment he got, still, at the exit of the same thing, it turns out. And Trump began to toughen up, speaking more and more harshly. And here Putin became before the choice, which destroyed him, at least on this track. What was the choice about? The choice was to give them a little back, well, that is, to give Trump at least something, give him, well, how at a certain moment, remember this piece of energy, yes, here is something like this. Because earlier Putin did it when Trump called him, they reached this type of energy piece, this is it, it was a supply, it was a bone dropped for Trump, and then Trump is like this, yes, he is probably ready for something now, we will solve everything soon. Here is something like this, it was necessary for Putin to do in order for him to somehow return to the stage where Trump believes in him again, where Trump again says that Putin is very respected, where Trump says that he believes that Putin wants the end of the war. Or Putin had the option to take a macho stance to show, I don't bow to anyone, screw you, Trump, we're in charge here. But since he's basically a rat and a coward, he chose something in between. So on one hand, he decided to keep cozy with Donald Trump and not insult him directly. But at the same time, he'd have his loyal lapdogs, whether it's Medvedev or Russian propagandist, go after Trump. Because you know how things work in Russian public politics. Without orders, without a mission, without permission, no dog, including Medvedev, who's become a total laughingstock, would bark without being told to. It will not be allowed for him, moreover, or some kind of Skabiva, her husband is Skabiv, and so on. It will also not dare to say anything against Trump without permission from above. And accordingly, Vladimir Putin either got proud of himself, or he thought that that's it, he's not ready to give way anywhere, or he sincerely believed that everything is fine in Russia on the front line, although it is not at all. But he made the call, in other words, it's time to unleash the watchdogs, flex some muscles, and so on. And so, Dmitry Medvedev and the rest of Putin's lapdogs started trashing Trump. And from the side of Putin, which is more important, not that there was no kind of good answer, there was no answer at all to what Donald Trump said. And this for Trump became such a Rubicon, after which he began to slowly move on to the actions. In fact, we will see the quintessence of these actions in the near future, I hope, because the ultimatum ends from August 8. Although initially the ultimatum was longer, the ultimatum was until September. The ultimatum was until the time when Vladimir Putin literally asked in their last conversation. When he said that we will capture everything in 50 days, in 60 days, and then in 10 days, Trump gave them 50 days, yes, well, that is, everything matched, everything was normal, but Vladimir Putin decided that everything was fine, he was the most cool now. That's always been his downfall. One of Vladimir Putin's biggest problems is that he misjudges the situation constantly. He gets carried away with his pride, always obsessed with showing he's got guts, and not even to an enemy, but to his circle. For him, it's crucial that there be no talk whatsoever about him being weak, no whispers that he's bowing to America or anything like that. And apparently this played its role. As a result, Vladimir Putin has what he has, and it is Donald Trump who. As a result, Vladimir Putin is left with what he's got, Donald Trump, who's now issuing ultimatums, openly saying how deeply disappointed he is in Putin and sending nuclear submarines to Russia's shores. Now let's look at the answer that Vladimir Putin actually gave on Trump's ultimatum after a while. First of all, it's a very strange response, aesthetically speaking, honestly. That little meeting with Lukashenko on the bench, I didn't quite get the idea. Maybe it was supposed to be some kind of, hey, we're just regular guys moment, like, look at us, sitting out here on a log, breeze in our faces, and so on. But it looked pitiful. I mean, not necessarily pathetic, but you see what I'm getting at. People of Putin's age, with Putin's face in that kind of natural setting, well, they don't exactly look the way Putin would probably like. You just can't pretend to be a macho man anymore. You can't pull off the image that Supreme Medvedev paints of you on those propaganda posters. No, you're old. Time takes its toll. No matter how much Botox you inject, you're still a tired, small, shriveled, sagging old man. And to be absolutely clear, this isn't about lookism or ageism for real. I just show that Putin wants to form a certain image, and what we were shown is as far as possible from this image. Not because someone showed it wrong, but because, in principle, it is impossible. Why is this important, it seems to me? Because it shows again that Putin does not quite adequately perceive reality. It seems to me that he has lost contact with reality. It seems to me that he no longer understands what he looks like, what he does, what real conditions he is trying to analyze. This is literally a grandfather behind a garage with another grandfather. Although, by the way, Lukashenko looks much more harmonious in this image because he is not trying. He is just in the image he has been trying to build his life. Moreover, he is not the person who he is building his image from. He is building the image of such a head of a collective farm. In fact, Lukashenko is an absolutely cunning, predictable, and bloody dictator. Putin is also a cunning, predictable, and bloody dictator, but Putin is afraid to demonstrate his stupidity, and Lukashenko is not afraid, so his image is quite finished and organic, although stupid, of course. But why I talk about the images and the images? I just like the aesthetics of this sitting very much. It finally came to the point of these grandfathers behind the garages who sit and discuss something. In summary, Putin did not look strong. This is what I want to emphasize, and this shows, including, that Putin has stopped understanding whether he's actually able to project the image he wants. Because a dictatorship is always about the image, a dictatorship is always about what is in the dictator's head, and this for me was just a confirmation that Putin does not understand what is happening. Why did I look for confirmation about whether he understands or not? Because those things that Putin says are explained only by two different options. The first option is that he sincerely believes in this, but that is, that he really has no connection with reality, that he does not imagine what is happening in reality. And in fact, this is a bad scenario, in fact, because if Putin does not understand what is happening, this means that he, without a healthy assessment of the situation, cannot understand when he needs to stop even based on his own goals. The second option is that he pretends. Well, that is, he is literally making his price high, bluffing, and so on. Unfortunately, from everything I see, it seems to me that Putin does not pretend. It seems to me that Putin really believes in what he says. This, of course, is a big problem that will cost a large number of lives. Because what Putin says does not correspond to the reality. At the same time, if he thinks that way, and it seems to me that he thinks that way in the end, this will lead to even more meat cutting, in which more people will die from the Ukrainian side, from the Russian side, many times more. Well, that is just because Russia has a situation that is getting worse and worse day by day, but we will talk about this with you now. Basically, it seems to me that Putin isn't fully aware of what's really going on, and that means none of Trump's threats will work. Only actions will work, because threats work on those who can evaluate them, who can evaluate the consequences of these threats. Putin obviously can't evaluate the consequences of these threats, so Donald Trump will have to act, as Europe will have to act. That is, there is no such thing that Putin will get scared and stops. Well, get scared isn't quite the right phrase. I'd say he'll soberly assess the situation and stop, but honestly, I don't think that scenario is on the table anymore. Putin's living in a fantasy land of pink ponies he's invented in his head, and nothing's bringing him back to reality. That's why he'll have to be stopped by force. Not meaning outright shooting him, though I'm all for that, honestly. But I mean there has to be real pressure applied, one that stops the Russian offensive and brings the Russian economy and defense industry to a halt. Now before we move on to the statements of Putin himself and Lukashenko, by the way, and what is wrong with them, I remind you that you can support this video with your like, comments, and subscriptions to the channel. Your subscriptions are especially important for its spread. Although it is not very important, I have been thinking for a long time about making it or not. I just share my thoughts with you about what I see. It does not seem to me that this has a fundamental meaning, because we did not learn anything fundamental new, so if you do not want to subscribe to this video, like it, leave a comment. It's not a problem. In general, everything is at your discretion, but if you want to support the channel in general, and that's exactly the kind of hard-hitting stuff we need, plus there are lots of important videos, then Patreon. The link's in the description, so check it out and consider supporting. Also, grab yourself an NVPN. NVPN is a tool to bypass blocking. You can bypass YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Telegram, Discord in short, all these endless blockages. You can increase the speed with the speed test, right? All these endless blockages of the Russian side are designed to make of you sterile morons who can't look anything but Solovyov. I'm against it. I believe that you have the right to consume the information you want, so buy NVPN by the link in the description, thereby supporting the release of new videos. But let's move on to Putin's statement. So, Putin made the first statement, which can be considered as a response to the ultimatum of Donald Trump, who promised to impose sanctions at the beginning of August, writes the agency. If Russia does not achieve a peace agreement in Ukraine by this time, then the consequences of this ultimatum will hit. And here I will only show you one fragment. I will probably not look at the rest. It is all impossible. Well, here's the fragment where he literally responds to Donald Trump. As for any disappointments from anyone, all disappointments arise from excessive expectations. This is a known general rule. But in order for the decision to be made calmly, you need to make a conditional conversation. And not in the public, but you need to do this calmly, in the silence of the negotiating process. That's just plain rudeness. It's called being rude. Vladimir Putin started being rude to Donald Trump because, in fact, disappointed is the word that Trump used in relation to Putin. You will say, well, how can Putin not to be rude to Trump if Trump being rude to Putin? Yes, just the problem is that Putin needs something from Trump and not the other way around. That is, Trump would of course want to stop the war in Ukraine because he gave such a promise, and in fact the voters want this, and that Nobel Peace Prize is dangling in front of his eyes. But let's be honest, the life of America is not connected with the war in Ukraine. It is not connected at all. Even if Ukraine loses for the US directly, it won't be a massive problem. Well, that is, it can be a problem for Taiwan for America in the future if it wants to protect the interests of Taiwan. It can be a problem for the West and so on, but directly for Donald Trump, this is not a problem either because it is all not a question of the next 2 years, for example. Yes, so here Putin is much more interested in Trump than Trump is in Putin. Because Trump is neither hot nor cold, he can do this, he can do that, because Trump is only interested in Trump. Putin is also only interested in Putin, but only Putin and his life in the future. Literally, life depends on what will happen on the front line. That's exactly why Trump can afford to be rude to Putin in this tough guy system of theirs, but Putin can't afford to do the same to Trump, because the consequences for Putin could be, let's put it this way, much worse. And in fact, Putin is already going directly to be rude, without any reverence, without any respected partners, which means that, well, you don't have to be surprised, you won't be surprised. The advice, by the way, is not bad, but the other thing is that this is literally beep of Trump. And when Trump is so angry, this is a pretty stupid position. Well, as for the negotiations in silence, then, again, the old KGB story, Trump tried it. Well, Trump made negotiations in silence with Vladimir Putin, called him at night, everything like that. It did not lead to anything, and this is another Putin's mistake. That is, it was necessary to give Trump something a little bit, if Putin wanted to hold him in his orbit, if Putin wanted Trump to continue to call the Zelensky dictator, if Putin wanted Trump to continue to say that he was not going to sponsor Ukraine, if Putin wanted Trump to keep saying that Europe is collapsing and that America should stay out of it. All this was possible. Putin had ideal conditions to continue to have allies as Donald Trump. But he did not do this, or did not want to, or did not understand what was needed to be done for this. Putin also made it clear that Russia's position on Ukraine has not changed since, as he called the conditions of the war stopping in June last year. The conditions, he said, are definitely the same. This is not even a condition, but a goal. I formulated the goal of Russia. Until that moment, we were told that it was not clear what Russia wanted. So we formulated in June last year, at a meeting with the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there everything is clear, but the main thing is to eliminate the root causes of this crisis. This is the main thing. Well, to eliminate the root causes of this crisis, Vladimir Putin should shoot in the temple or not in the temple, wherever he wants. But the basic thing, I will remind you, is what Russia formulated there in June 2024 and what Putin is talking about. So in fact, it is 4 areas, that is, Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporozhsk, disarming of Ukraine, denazification, whatever that's supposed to mean, and a ban on Western aid. The return of the Russian language and the UOC, which has effectively remained a branch of the FSB. So, in essence, what Vladimir Putin was offering Ukraine in 2024 was outright capitulation. What is interesting, he suggested the same capitulation to Ukraine in 2022, but the conditions for capitulation in 2022 were better than the conditions for capitulation in 2024. You say, Michael, it's logical because they fight and Russia achieves success, but this is completely illogical, because Russia controls less territory than it controlled in 2022, and Ukraine had less opportunity to resist the Russian offensive than it had in 2025 and 2024. Therefore, Putin's position is paradoxical. The situation for Russia is getting worse and Russia's demands are growing. That's why I say that only 2 options are possible here. Either Putin is bluffing or he is off base, and it seems to me that he is off base. Moreover, some Z channels have taken notice of this because, in addition to the fact that he said that the dynamics of SVO is positive here, The Russian armed forces advance along the entire front line, everywhere in all areas, but he also said such a phrase which no one can justify to you. Right? You can conduct an experiment, go to any Z public and ask to just comment on this phrase. What kind of phrase? We do not have a single pointless loss, Vladimir Putin said. Well, here, even if we go away from the fact that all Russia's losses are pointless. Yes, that is, this whole war, and since the year 2014 until the full-scale invasion in 2022, and now to 2025, all Russia's losses are pointless. Russia has no goals. Russia doesn't have the motivation to conduct this war. This war is unprofitable for Russia. It is destroying Russia, besides destroying Ukraine. But not a single pointless loss. This is funny, because he said it exactly the day when the Z channels in masses continued to complain about the failure and zeroing by the commander, called White. The day when they complained about Katia with Valia, who filed a court case against the Z channel of Roman Sopinkov for publishing the video of Ernest and Gudvin, two UAVs, who were sent to the meat assault to zero them out, since they told about corruption, drug trafficking, and command. Well, that is, in addition to the fact that the whole war is pointless, the way Russia conducts it is just one's big wasted losses. It seems to me that the number of people who, from the point of view of military logic, were weared out by Russian army, are higher than the number of people who, from the point of view of military strategy, were not wasted. Yes, that is, and this is all. This is about uniform, this is about what they are given, this is about the generals who stole everything, this is about meat assaults, this is about the problem with the golden hour for the evacuation. Well, that's it, absolutely. Look at the report today in which the Z channels tell us that, including the elite units, the paratroopers, they are completely self-sufficient. That is, they are not sent anything by the Ministry of Defense. Neither drones, nor Starlink, nor cars, nor quad bikes, nor food. Well, that is, they say we even buy food for ourselves because we are sent shit. I am not in order for you to sympathize with them. They do not deserve sympathy. Each of them deserves a bullet to the head. But the story is that, no, pointless losses are literally a synonym for how Russia conducts the war. Does Vladimir Putin know about this? A good and open question, because the system of disinformation in the Russian army, built in such a way that Vladimir Putin in March and April 2022 ran, trying to make the generals not to lie. I remember the publication on this topic that Putin was very angry said, why not all the generals continue to lie? The thing is, when you surround yourself with loyal but stupid generals and build a system where the messenger gets his head cut off, and the one who brings good news gets medals and promotions, your whole system ends up being made up of such shit-eaters. That is, all the information that will go up, it will all be distorted. This is why the Ministry of Defense always draws these arrows on the map, which do not correspond to the reality at all. How they do not correspond to the reality in Toretsk, how they do not correspond to the reality in the Sumy region now, where Russia, on the contrary, is retreating, lost 2 settlements, how it does not correspond to the reality in many other parts of the front. In Chasiv Yar, in particular in Chasiv Yar, I don't remember how it is right, because the Russian Ministry of Defense, apparently, in order for it to be, before that Putin press conference, which was planned earlier, he had to make it in Laos, as far as I understand, but he carried it out for a day before that. Apparently, he had to announce loudly that we took Chasiv Yar. Well, first of all, Chasiv Yar was taken for more than a year. And secondly, it was not taken. That is, there is data of objective control. There are frames that show that part of Chasiv Yar still remains under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. And the flag picker that the Russians made is exactly what the flag picker is. They all were killed after this flag picker was made. Well, a standard absolute story, the battles continue in Toretsk. Its Russian Federation Defense Ministry took it on February 7, according to its reports, but the battles still continue. In the city of Toretsk, that is, this is taken in alone the cities and villages, what the Russian Ministry of Defense is doing. And in fact, Vladimir Putin in this his press release says that is taken from Chasiv Yar. Ukraine's statement that Chasiv Yar is not under the control of Russian armed forces means that leadership is not very informed about the course of the events that are taking place. Here, Lukashenko tried to help him somehow, understands that he is talking shit, his colleague so to speak, and said, maybe there are some uncleared houses there are no houses left on the outskirts. Putin broke it, no, there are no houses there. Well, in general, we know that this is not true. We know that Vladimir Putin is lying. The question is whether he is lying to himself or to other people. Because when he lies to himself, this is a monstrous problem for him. This means that he inadequately perceives what is happening. Is Russia moving forward? Yes, it is moving forward. But it is moving forward at 500 square kilometers per month. These are the peak indicators now of the Russian advance, the peak indicators of the deaths of Russian soldiers. From the point of view of this war, the territory of Ukraine is 500 square kilometers. This is, as they say in the famous meme, absolutely, you understand. Well, it is nothing. Yes, it is all difficult for Ukrainian defenders. They just do an incredible work holding certain settlements, holding certain kilometers. But if we cynically move all the horror of this war to the side and look at the strategic level, at the advance of Russia, they do not exist in fact. These are so unnoticeable things on the large map that it is even shameful to call it advance. You see, this is within 3.5 years. I am not trying to humiliate the Russian army, it can handle itself. I am trying to demonstrate that from the point of view of perception, Putin has a big problem. There is no confident advance, there are no successes on the front line. For 3.5 years, Russia is trying and cannot take the Lugansk region completely, although there are 3 women left in the village which they cannot capture in any way. Not talking about their idea to take Zaporozhye, Kherson, somewhere there to move on them. It is impossible. Well, it is just impossible. You know, they say it is impossible in the next year, in the next 2, Russia will do something. It is, in principle, impossible. For such an army as Russian, well, there is no such opportunity, so either Vladimir Putin is lying to himself if he lies to other people, then he keeps people for idiots at all, because now it is 2025. I remember Resonantsnaya wrote enough but not such a publication article about the fact that Putin never used Wikipedia, that in principle it is quite interesting to imagine that Putin does not use the internet. He does not understand what it is. He does not understand how it works. He does not know. This is a Soviet person. He thinks that if something is said on TV, then people will believe in it. He doesn't understand that there are people like us. He does not understand that most people in Ukraine and in Russia receive information from the internet, or at least have such an opportunity. That is, it is already partially explained. That is why it all is now blocked. But he does not imagine this. He does not sit in the Telegram channels. He does not go to deep state. He does not geolocate frames, you see. So he sincerely believes probably that it is possible to fool everyone or to fool himself, and this is full ass then. Lukashenko further said that Chasiv Yar is the road to Kramatorsk, the center of the SVO. Ukraine should run to ask Putin for help. Let's make a deal, or else in a month and a half or 2, there will not even be any defense structures left. The Russians will gnaw it all off, capture it, and go further. They will return. Putin corrected him. This is ours. You know what is interesting? I did not until the end understand what Lukashenko is talking about. That is, it seems to me that he is talking about the Donetsk region, but first of all, there is no Donetsk region in any case for 2 months. If he talks about all 4 regions, then this is just fantastic at all. But at the same time, it seems to me that he does not really understand what he wants. You know how Lukashenko is trying to make it look like part of Russian propaganda, or, for example, European pro-Russian propaganda, that Ukraine does not want to freeze on the front line. This is not true, and at Vladimir Putin, who does not want to freeze the war on the front line. Ukraine did not want this, but went to this in Saudi Arabia. She agreed on the conditions of the United States to announce an agreement to freeze everything on the front line. This is not what Vladimir Putin wants. He is against this, so when every time some beep tells you on Twitter or somewhere else that the whole thing in Ukraine is not true, the whole thing is in Vladimir Putin. Well, so further there were another stories about the Sumy region, which is extremely funny. Because in the Sumy region, Russia, they're retreating, but not everyone is making it out in time. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment didn't make it. They got surrounded and hit Russians. And the only thing they've got left in the end is Orshnik. So Orshnik has been delivered to the troops. Sites have been selected for future positions in Belarus. Preparation of those positions is underway. We'll wrap this up by the end of the year, they say. You know what the problem is with Orshnik? This is a piece of shit. But in the sense that if we are talking about Orshnik in the nuclear implementation, then this does not make sense because Russia has enough nuclear arsenal to threaten with nuclear arsenal. Yes, it has become much less. It has become much less. Admiral Kuznetsov no longer covers the nuclear submarine forces of Russia, which I told you about. Because of this, the submarines are highly vulnerable. Yes, strategic aviation lost about 30% of its fleet after Operation Web. But the silos are the main method Russia still has for launching ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads are still there. So honestly, whether it's Orshnik or not flying at you doesn't really matter. When 100, 200, 300, 400 nuclear warheads are coming your way, it makes no difference whether it's an Orshnik or not. Yeah, no one survives either way. So from that perspective, bragging about Orshnik is pointless. And if we're talking about the Orshnik in its non-nuclear version, well, it's a bad missile. Precisely because it's designed to carry a nuclear warhead. Without one, it's an inaccurate, poorly performing missile. It fails at its intended purpose. We've seen one Orshnik strike, it achieved nothing. Absolutely zero. I explained all this to you in detail. Orshnik is one big embarrassment. In its non-nuclear version, it's useless, and in the nuclear version, everything else already does the job. So what's all the pomp about? It's not entirely clear. And then Trump responded to Putin's response through Dmitry Medvedev, no less. Of course, we say, well, Medvedev brought it on himself, he pissed Trump off. But that's only half the truth. In reality, Trump is just using Medvedev as a tool to effectively fire back at Putin. When it was already evening in Moscow on Friday, Donald Trump posted twice about Russia on his social media platform, Truth Social. In the first post, he shared data on Russia's losses in the war in Ukraine, figures the Russian authorities have been carefully hiding. So basically, while Vladimir Putin was bragging about moving forward and all that, Donald Trump directly responded, "No, you're taking massive losses." Now, Trump's numbers on Russian losses are a bit inflated compared to Ukraine's. He claims a 14-to-1 ratio, which just doesn't add up. But still, that's what he says. In his second post, he announced that in response to Security Council Secretary Dmitry Medvedev's posts, he's moving 2 nuclear submarines. This is practically a continuation of the tactics of pressure chosen by Trump on Vladimir Putin through Medvedev. Just a few hours before that, the Russian president basically made it clear he has no intention of ending the war in Ukraine under Trump's pressure, and dropped another hint about the possible use of nuclear weapons, Orshnik and all that. In the first post, Trump reported that only in July, almost 20,000 Russian soldiers died in the Ukrainian war. In total, according to him, since the beginning of the year, Russia lost 112,500 soldiers. This is a lot of unnecessary deaths, he wrote. However, Ukraine, he wrote, also suffered greatly from January 1, 2025. They lost about 8,000 soldiers, and this number does not include missing people. Well, as you can see, it turns out 1 to 14, and this is only for the dead. This is not a very likely situation. That is, indeed, Russia is losing much more, several times more soldiers, but not in 14 times. No, it is impossible to imagine this. An hour later, Trump stated that he ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be placed in the appropriate areas in response to the provocation statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, in case these stupid provocative statements are more than just words. In fact, this was just a continuation of the back and forth between Trump and Medvedev that started some time ago. What's most interesting is that, in part, it seems like a direct message to Putin, just delivered through Medvedev, which makes it convenient. And Trump probably thinks it's too soon to openly clash with Putin directly. Maybe he still hopes to pressure him into some kind of dialogue using threats, but doing it through Medvedev works just fine. After all, Medvedev put himself out there. But the most important thing about these stories involving nuclear submarines is that it's starting to feel like real action. I don't actually know if those submarines really set sail or not, and maybe that's the point, it's impossible to verify. This info is something you just can't confirm, but the fact is that this is in fact Trump's nuclear threat to Medvedev and to Vladimir Putin. And it seems to me that this is his answer to the answer of Vladimir Putin. He's urging him to be more cooperative. We'll see what changes or doesn't in the coming days, but I want to stress once again Vladimir Putin's incredible talent. He turns everything into crap. He manages to do it even where it seems impossible. Let's be honest, how could you imagine that the Russian army would not be able to defeat Ukraine? Ask any military expert 4 or 5 years ago. This is impossible, this is on paper impossible, mathematically impossible, but this is reality. Russia could not defeat Ukraine. Russia continues to work hard to move through a lot, losing a huge number of people and writing down all its Soviet equipment while it still did not work out, and the NATO, which is called NATO, has not even come to battle. Who could have imagined that Vladimir Putin would manage to screw up Armenia, Azerbaijan, Syria, and basically all his allies? How is that even possible? I mean, the guy's got truly unique talents. To take a super loyal Donald Trump and turn him into your enemy, that's something you really have to be skilled to pull off. And all this happens first of all because Putin is seriously losing touch with reality. He's just relying on bad information, which ultimately makes him, well, what I mean is, it's not just that it makes him do things, but because of the bad information, he makes wrong decisions. His assessment of the situation is flawed. Assessment of the situation. And secondly, he's a petty person, obsessed only with himself, who, despite having an incredible amount of resources, because Russia is a huge country with a massive population and vast resources, he has driven it into the worst period in its entire post-Soviet history. And that's, of course, absolute madness. To even imagine it, well, no one else in his position would likely have been capable of doing that. So he's not just unsuccessful, he's successful at being unsuccessful. He's basically a modern-day hero stratus who will undoubtedly go down in history, just not in the way he thinks. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and I have such approximate thoughts about this performance of old people on a bench. I don't know if such a format is interesting to you or not. Write about it in the comments, but we will see you tomorrow. All the best. Bye.